And so again, we just finished talking about population bottlenecks. I'll just note that it's theorized that there was a big population bottleneck about 10,000 years ago in the wild cheetah populations in Africa. And so we see that there was a dozen or so individuals that survived. Um, and then we see a lot of genetic relatedness between all of the cheetahs that live today. Um, and so something changed, killed a bunch of them, and now we get this new allele frequency, which is probably quite different from whatever the frequency was before. Okay. Looking at our fourth agent of evolution, we've got migration, and this is exactly what you think it is. Individuals are moving from one population to another population. Okay? And usually this might not have a big impact, but if the number of individuals moving between populations is very large, it can change the allele frequency in the overall population they're moving to or leaving as well. And then if there's a big difference between the allele frequencies of the individuals moving in and the population they're moving to, it can change things a lot as well. So here we've got population one with this certain amount of blue and green, population two with its certain allele frequency of whatever these traits are. Individuals move from population one to population two. Okay, and so this is our migration event. And after migration, we've changed the allele frequency in both of our populations. Okay, and so we get this evolution, this change in allele frequency in these populations because of this migration event. Okay, and our fifth example is selection. Okay, and so this is because of some characteristic, organisms are able to survive and then produce more offspring. The key here is producing more offspring because you could live for 150 years, and if you don't have any babies, you're not passing your genes on. So the amount of offspring that they produce is a key part of selection. So we've got two types here. We've got artificial selection, where a breeder is deciding what characteristics are being passed on, and then natural selection, where whatever conditions there are in that environment are determining what traits are the most advantageous. It could be predator pressures, it could be access to food, all sorts of different things could put selective pressures on populations. Okay? There have to be three things true for natural selection to take place. You have to have a variation in that trait within the population. So here in this example with the frogs, within this trait, we've got green, red, and purple. Okay, so we've got variation in the trait. That variation must be inheritable. So it has to be in the actual genes, and it has to be in the gametes for it to get passed on. And then three, individuals with one version of the trait must produce more offspring than those with a different version of the trait. We call this differential reproductive success. Because of the trait that they have, they make more babies. Okay? And so here we see this again. Three things that need to be true for natural selection to take place. And again, these are things you need to know. You have to have variation for a trait. So in this example, speed of the rabbit. You've got super fast rabbits, rabbits are in the middle, and you got your slower rabbits. Heritability. They pass on the running speed to their offspring. Sure, yeah, we see that. And then three, differential reproductive success. The fastest rabbits are able to escape the foxes. The other ones aren't. So we're going to see more and more fast rabbits because those are the genes that are going to be left because the slow rabbits get eaten and don't make babies. Okay, so we see this differential reproductive success. Okay. Here's an example of color in fish. Okay, so guppies, super colorful fish. You can get them at the pet store pretty cheap. We find in the island of Trinidad, we find them in nature and in a couple of different stream environments. So there are pools above waterfalls where guppy are found along killifish, a fish that very rarely eats the guppies. But then at the bottom of waterfalls, we find them with pike cichlids, which is a predator of guppies. During flooding, guppies can move between the pools, but typically they can't. So what we see is that there are differences in appearance between these guppies. So we see that the guppies in these high predation pools with the pike cichlid are pretty drab in color. They're mostly brown. Okay. The guppies in the low predation pools up at the top of the waterfall are much more colorful. So we see that high predation pools with the pike cichlid reproduce earlier and don't get as big. And so we've got these differences between these pools, and this suggests there's some natural selection taking place here. And so here we can see this. We've got our colorful guppy up top with the killifish because they're not being eaten. We've got our brown guppy in the bottom with the pike cichlid, where they do typically get eaten. And so what we see is that the brown guppies are able to escape predation because they blend in with the sand and the dirt a lot more easily. They don't stand out. With the bright guppies, now why would they even bother being bright colored? And here we see some sexual selection happening, where the brightest colored guppies get chosen by females to fertilize their eggs, similar to what we see in betta fish that are really bright colored. Okay. And so John Endler did an experiment on these guppies to see if this is in fact what was happening. Okay. So in a lab, he took guppies, put them in 3 conditions: no predator at all, killifish, cichlid. Okay. And so guppies are with all of these things. After 10 generations, okay, so they were allowed to breed, produce babies, 10 separate generations. In our no or low predation risk pool, so our first 2, the guppies were bigger and more colorful than we saw in the one with the cichlid present. Okay. He then did field experiments where he did this actually out in the field, and he found the exact same thing. And so in our no or low predation pools, we had more spots and they were more colorful. But in our high predation pools, we saw over this amount of time, okay, we saw changes in the allele frequency in these pools, okay, because there was a selective pressure of a predator being present. Okay. This is a really interesting video on the ice fish. Go ahead and watch it if you want. I believe there is a question on it within our exam. And it's super interesting how this happened. And it's an excellent example of natural selection that occurred. Okay. And so you should be able to answer these questions after watching that. Basically, what we see is it's got no red blood cells. It no longer has the gene for hemoglobin because they don't need it. They're able to absorb all the oxygen through their skin in these cold Arctic waters. What they do have, though, is antifreeze. They've got molecules that are built to keep their blood, that fluid in their body, from freezing in these very cold Arctic waters. Okay. Can things like this happen in humans? Sure, if nature allows it to stick around. Okay. Definitions for evolution. Okay. We had 2. So evolution is descent with modification. And then evolution is also a change in allele frequency within a population. Okay. Remember, evolution happens in a population, not in individuals. 5 mechanisms. We've got mutation, which is the ultimate source of all genetic variation. In this portion is random. We've got non-random mating, genetic drift, migration, and then selection. For natural selection to happen, you have to have differences in a trait, has to be able to be inherited, and it has to cause differential reproductive success. Some organisms have more babies than others. Okay, we'll pick up in this next part in the next video.